theanswer.com.
If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. And going to talk to philosophy professor Crispin Sartwell from Dickinson College momentarily. But, amid all of this back and forth between the Socialist Spice Girls and the president and the advance of cultural Marxism on campus, I often use the phrase sentimental barbarians or sophisticated barbarians, and people want me to define what that means. Let me give you an example and then maybe work back to explanation. Christian doctor in the UK sacked after saying he couldn't refer to any 6-foot-tall bearded man as a madam. Dr. David Macarith told a panel that using transgender pronouns was a ritual denial of an obvious truth. He's Christian. He's taken his dismissal to an employment tribunal in the UK. Good luck with that. Alan Josephson, distinguished psychiatrist who since 2003 has transformed the division of child and adolescent psychiatry and psychology at the University of Louisville from a struggling department to a nationally acclaimed program. In the fall of 2017, he appeared on a panel at the Heritage Foundation, shared his professional opinion on the medicalization of gender-confused youth, meaning he's opposed to 8-year-olds deciding that it's time for gender reassignment surgery or hormone treatment. The university responded by demoting him and then effectively firing him. Josephson's reaction to this is not dissimilar to what we've heard from a lot of academics we've spoken to who don't believe that it could happen to me when they run afoul of Marxist orthodoxy on campus. In this case, Josephson was speaking as a medical professional, not in any way as affiliated with University of Louisville. Hardly matters. He says, shortly after the speech he gave at Heritage, I became clear that only a few of my faculty were upset with some of the things that I had said. That a few of his faculty were. Within a few short weeks, I was removed from my position, my leadership position, then subjected to fairly hostile work environment situations, finally informed my contract would not be renewed. He describes how he processed the ordeal. It is at various phases. The first phase was, this just can't be happening to me. I was very successful and very well liked. I built my division up from a few people to probably 15, and we had a clinic of almost 30. I was banned from faculty meetings. I was banned from certain kinds of interactions with staff and told that I could not, what I could and could not say to people. And this was a place I built. And then the stress of one's personal relationships. My family worried about me. Friends worried about me. It's probably 6 months before I felt comfortable and was sleeping again. The personal stress is pretty enormous, but then I decided to do something. And part of the do something is he is fighting back in court. He's filed a complaint in the district court in Kentucky. So what are we to make of the continued elimination of dissent and dissenters? Not in the concentration camp sense yet, but certainly professionally. And are these examples, and there are many others like him, as we all know, and we've discussed every incident, so that it's not just some general statement that some conservative is making. It's not just imagining this is happening because I disagree with the campus orthodoxy. It's individual cases with real names that are real people with real details. Tell me this: the examples of the Josephsons of the world are not a message sent throughout the ecosystem about what you can and can't say, what you can and can't think. Research you can and can't do. The research in this topic area of transgenderism as a social contagion among youth that was done by a professional academic at Brown University, squashed. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by the aforesaid Crispin Sartwell, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Dickinson College. Hopefully, we won't get him into any trouble. And author of Entanglements: A System of Philosophy. Crispin, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you
So what
again. Good to see you.
so what about these cases like Professor Josephson at Louisville? How do you process them?
Yeah, well, I think it's an unbelievably acute problem right now. I mean, some version of it happened to me. Some version of it has happened to a number of people I know. Whether it is, actual deletion or firing or demotion or just unbelievable ostracization. Um, yeah, it's as you say, it's in the ecosystem, and a few of these firings is plenty to shut most people up. Actually, I mean, yeah, and I think about it all the time as I write or as I speak to someone like you, Ben, and if I just say a wrong sentence, I'm not sure what might happen to me professionally, and I guess I need health insurance. You know what I mean? I'm nearing retirement. I have to think about like the practical details. But yes, it's. I think it's really reached a acute phase.
Well,
Can you
I'm sorry,
remind
go
us what
ahead.
happened to you?
Um, I believe it or not, I'm restricted in what I can say about this. I was. You can Google it, or you may have previously, but I was marched off campus for posting a country music video on my blog. Time to Get a Gun by Miranda Lambert,
Hmm.
which was construed as a threat. And yeah, so but like I say, I can't really discuss the situation. I can discuss other people's situations.
Oh,
Oh,
so we're
you're
we're
cutting
starting to
out.
lose you there for a second. You just said you can't discuss this situation, but I'm sorry. What was the
Yeah,
last part?
I can discuss other people's situations though.
Okay, okay, no problem.
Yeah,
All right.
Let's talk a little bit about philosophers, and I want to. I know you've got a piece about some of the Western philosophers, but
yeah,
I want to talk about the Frankfurt School and Herbert
okay,
Marcuse and William Reich.
yes,
And this from Marcuse, who is really sort of one of the intellectual godfathers of the modern cultural Marxist movement, even if they don't know it, would seem to me. He
that
taught
seems right.
he talks about liberating tolerance that might seem apparently undemocratic, using repression and indoctrination to advance the agenda of a subversive majority. In other words,
Yeah,
the ends justify the means, and in order to get to a tolerant place, we're going to have to be a little bit intolerant, a little bit repressive as the means to tolerance.
yes.
It seems like
Well,
an
that's classic
oxymoron, but
Marxism.
that's what we're doing, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and that's classic Marxism, right? Is that we're going to have to impose totalitarianism to achieve, liberation in the long run. And it's just I mean, I guess it's like an obviously nonsensical argument. I just don't think you're going to end up in a place of tolerance by practicing extreme intolerance. But yeah, that does seem to be pretty, central to the whole Marxist conceptual structure in that case. Yeah.
And totalitarianism is the right word because it's all walks of life. It is all aspects of society. I just want to read something from Marcuse. The
Yeah.
withdrawal of toleration of speech and assembly from groups and movements which promote aggressive policies, armament, chauvinism, discrimination on the grounds of race and religion, or which oppose the extension of public services, Social Security, Medicare. Moreover, the restoration of freedom, though may necessitate new rigid restrictions on teachings and practices in
Yeah.
the educational institutions, and so on and so forth. Every aspect of life, which is now what you have seen, and why so many of our civic and cultural institutions have lost so much legitimacy among so many.
Yes, indeed. It's just a really sad situation. And one thing to think about, I'm sure you've talked about this, is the mechanisms that are constructed to control expression in all these respects in academia and elsewhere. They can be turned on a dime against against the leftists who put them in place. I mean, and they should really understand this because Donald Trump is president of the United States. And if he wants to start wielding speech restrictions, he's going to be wielding them against the very people who are endorsing them right now. So I just think that you got to think more carefully about what structures of authority you're recognizing, whether it's on a campus or, in a nation, really,
Yeah, but
because they can be turned to various ideological purposes.
well, you mentioned Trump, but don't you think Google and the big tech companies, they're filtering out speech? They're not letting certain
Yes,
videos go on. I mean, look at
yes,
PragerU and Dennis Prager yesterday, who testified yesterday.
yes, indeed. And I mean, but looking at it from another angle, what are they doing with the government of China?
Hmm.
And what kind of speech repression is the government of China engaged in? Thorough all the time with regard to everyone. And Google actually is liable to fit into that pretty comfortably if they want to. They can, and they are restricting speech even in the United States. But they can enter into the larger political structures of censorship, or the larger political structures of censorship can make use of those companies to really control the political discourse, considering how broadly these companies extend into all of our communications.
Yeah, but the interesting thing, going back to what you said about how this could be turned on them, if Trump used repressive tactics, if he tried to curtail people's First Amendment rights by executive authority, he would lose people who are otherwise inclined to be supportive, like me. But on the other
Yeah, me
side,
too.
if the repressive tactics that are being applied at universities and corporate boardrooms elsewhere are championed by the politicians of the left and the op-ed writers of the left, with very few exceptions.
Yes,
Seems to
indeed.
me the difference and the real danger.
Yes, I agree. And like I say, they just should be aware that these mechanisms and structures of restriction can be turned on them, very quickly. And it's liable to happen. I think. Who knows? I should just say, like I seemed to indicate a second ago, that I was a Trump supporter, which is not true.
No,
Yeah.
But anyway,
I got
yeah.
you. What did you think of Ayaan Hirsi Ali's piece this week about Ilhan Omar, since they're both of Somali descent? Ilhan
I
Omar.
guess I didn't see it.
Okay, well, here's what Ayaan Hirsi Ali
Yeah.
had to say, and fortunately for her, she's not an academic, so she is allowed to say this. Apparently, she talks
She's
about
someone I admire.
she talks about her experience as somebody who was and somebody who's been persecuted for her views in Africa as well as in the West.
Yes.
She writes, in my experience, it's difficult to get rid of the anti-Semitism on which you were weaned. To unlearn hate without coming to terms how you learn the hate is what she writes. Most Americans are familiar with the classic Western flavors of anti-Semitism, the Christian, European, white supremacist, communist types. But little attention has been paid to the special case of Muslim anti-Semitism. It's a pity, because today it's anti-Semitism's most zealous, most potent, and most underestimated form. And she describes sort of the circumstances in which she was raised in Somalia.
Yeah.
And so I just want to get your perspective on that, but more broadly, having to go to sort of the cultural roots of some toxic ideologies to sort of acknowledge the history, so you
Yes.
can help people unlearn toxic ideas.
Yes, and I mean, I'm kind of an equal opportunity person in this, because I do think Trump's tweets over the last few days have been extremely problematic on
Mhm.
similar grounds. Forms of intolerance, or forms of just condemning people on the largely on the basis of their immigration status or whatever it may be. But I do think it's worth coming out a little bit and thinking about, and that's what Hirsi Ali is doing. It's like the whole cultural context in which these things emerge. Like, if you're Ilhan Omar, you may not have carefully reflected until people started reacting so severely to some of the things you were taught as a child or whatever. So yes, it's worth looking at the histories, or even the deep conceptual structures informing this. Like, I think that's that's one reason it's worthwhile to look at the Frankfurt School, for example, and figuring out contemporary, a lot of what's going on, say, contemporary campus politics. And they've been directly influential there, actually. Like, those figures are huge on campus. Adorno and Horkheimer and stuff like this. Like, That's why I think like, the term cultural Marxism is, it's not a perfect term for all the stuff that's happening on campus, but it resonates because it really, a lot of campus leftism is informed directly by Frankfurt School Marxism.
Yeah, and it also highlights the utility of studying philosophy. You don't have to major, you don't have to become a professor in it, but understand that where ideas, the origins of some of these ideas, the idea like that just showed up 5 minutes ago and now everybody believes it. This has been generations of work handed down from one gang of thugs to the next, and and whether everybody knows it now today, what William Reich was writing about in 1920s is immaterial. It's understanding the trajectory of these ideas.
I don't know how thuggish they really were. I mean, if you think about thugs, you don't usually think about like the spectacled, professors, teaching at UCLA or whatever. But,
well, how about ideas that animate thugs? How about that?
Yeah, there you go. And so I had this piece in the Los Angeles Review of Books, Philosophical Salon, about like the roots of white supremacism in Western philosophy. Now that probably makes me sound pretty leftist or pretty PC, and I guess what I want to say about that is I'm neither on the left nor on the right. I'm both on the left and on the right, but I feel like I'm consistent actually. But yeah, I did like this piece kind of tracing racism to some of the basic conceptual structures of Western philosophy.
Right.
I guess in that case, I might even be agreeing with some of the Frankfurt School stuff actually. But
I
picking my spots.
I did read the piece, and it's worth checking out, particularly if you're interested in the origins of ideas, metaphysics in particular.